It's always good to be intellectually stimulated, right? Everyone stand up. We got another important keynote. Don't fall asleep, fellas. God is He's passing the baton today. This is part of it. All right, brothers, Mr. Kevin Wells, have a seat.
Father Jeff, those two guys reminded me of you a little bit with your talk. I'm joking. Come on, gentlemen. Come on, gentlemen. I was talking to Glenn about this conference a few weeks ago, and talking about what might be a good thing to talk about, and what really bubbled up was Venerable Aloysius Schwartz. I'd like you guys to see me. I have prayer cards are on the front table. I have a few at my table. I'd like all of you to try and get a prayer card of Venerable Aloysius Schwartz. Who's Father Al? Very few of you know him, have ever heard of him. I believe, well, forget about me, many thousands of people believe that he will be the next canonized saint from America. He's venerable. He's on the way. And I want to break open the story of Venerable Aloysius Schwartz, who I believe in my lifetime, I think very soon he will be canonized as saint, because there are hundreds of thousands today throughout the world that are praying for his intercession. Who is he? Why don't you know him? Well, one reason is he prayed not to be known. He didn't want to be known by anybody, but he's, in my opinion, again, forget about my opinion, the opinion with people that are much wiser than I, moral theologians, holy priests and bishops, missionaries, that he is precisely the priest that the church needs today by the witness of what he did in his too short life. So I'm Irish, and I'm a storyteller, and I'm an old sports writer. So I want to break open an omnibus of a story of just startling heroism, sacred heroism. So who's Father Al? I didn't know much about him 3.5 years ago. I'm from D.C., so I had heard of him because he was born and raised in D.C., but so I'd written the book, The Priest We Need to Save the Church, and it got out there pretty good, and in the aftermath, I guess I gave a presentation somewhere, and a married couple came up to me, and they said, "Hey, Kevin, we know who the priest we need to save the church is, and his name is Venerable Aloysius Schwartz." And I'm thinking, yeah, I've heard of him, and yeah. Well, we would like you to consider writing his story, his biography, and internally I'm thinking, I have no desire to write a book about a priest I don't know. But I'll listen to this nice couple and hear him out, and they spoke in glowing terms about him. And then finally, I said, "Well, Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, I appreciate it. I've got to get going." And okay, well, look, Kevin, we understand. Here's some stories on his life, and they handed me some literature, and I said, "Thank you very much." And I went home and ditched the paperwork. Didn't give another thought. Didn't care about it. And a few months went by, and one day I'm like, "Yeah, you know what? I probably should take a look at it." And so I started to read it, and an hour or two later, I said, "My goodness, I had just spent all this time studying the lives of John Vianney, Padre Pio, Bosco, Damien the Leper, John Newman. And what I've just read, I haven't read before. I've never read anything like this." So I called my favorite Catholic publisher, Ignatius Press, and I explained the story to Father Joseph Fessio, the president, and he hadn't heard of Venerable Aloysius Schwartz, but when he heard the story, he said, "If it's true, please write this story." So here's what happened. we agreed. So he sent me a contract, and it was time to write about Venerable Aloysius Schwartz. And then all of a sudden, COVID-19 sweeps down upon the world, and I have a contract where I have to finish a book in 8 months, 80, 90,000 words, and I haven't really done anything, and the whole world shut down. And I had heard that he had opened these boys' towns and girls' towns all over the world, as I mentioned earlier. And I heard there were sisters down there that once helped him in post-war Korea, in the Philippines, and different countries, and they were in this girls' town with these 3,000 plus girls. And I said, man, the whole world shut down, but if I can just get down there, then I can put on my journalism hat and begin to ask questions and understand who this man was. And actually, I can begin to write this book. So somehow, I was allowed into Mexico. And this was back in the day when they made you wear 74 masks, and they would take Q-tips that were like totem poles, and they were made out of wood, and they wouldn't just dab you, they would stick it up to like part of your brain, hit part of your brain, and they would swirl it around. I said, I don't care, I'll take it all. Give it to me all, because I need to get started on this thing. Well, Kevin, you understand if you go down there that we don't know what protocol is, and you might not be able to get back. And I'm like, yeah, my wife has given me liberty. It's all about my wife, right? We know this. Krista said, Kevin, yeah, I believe in this book. I believe in Father Al, what you told me, so go ahead. So I got down to Girls Town, and I don't know how to explain it other than to say this. You go in, and they shut the gate behind you. It's in a hardscrabble part of Mexico, and what you see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of girls poured out with joy that you see hundreds of girls with bright hallelujahs of smiles and joy, and they're playing soccer and basketball, or they're playing other games, or they're just running around. They run on this big track, and everyone has joy. And finally, on that first day, Sister Margie, who's the Mother Superior, she's in charge of 12,000 of these girls and boys in Honduras, Brazil, Mexico, Guatemala. She has the Western Hemisphere. Another Mother Superior has the Eastern Hemisphere, Tanzania, Philippines, Korea. Sister Margie was there, and I said, Sister, this is tremendous. And she said, yes, Kevin, it is. And Kevin, I know why you're here. They've told me you want to get to know Father Al, and Sister Margie actually tended to Father Al as he was dying of Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS, in the early 90s in this very place in Mexico, in Chalco. And I said, Sister, yes, so whenever you're available, we can start to sort of understand Father Al. And she says, yes, Kevin. But if you come here to talk about Father Al, first I want you to just relax and come back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., and then we'll get into Father Al. Yes, sister. Of course. So the next morning I showed up, and there's 12 girls in their blue skirts and their white blouses, and they're all lined up. And Sister Margie's there and said, talk to these 12 girls, and then you'll begin to know who Father Al is. So I saw them, and they were all smiling, and I saw them as just beautiful girls, 14, 15, 16 years old, some a little bit younger. They're there for 5 years to have education, catechesis, masses, adoration, daily adoration. They're just loved back to health by the sisters. As I told you, these are the most bullied children in the world. They've been prostituted. They've been pimped out. The boys have been beaten. They've been trafficked. They've grown up with the violence of poverty. These are the poorest of the poor that the sisters bring in and mother back to life. So the girls are smiling. I didn't really know much of this. So I began to talk to them, and one by one, I began to understand who Father Al was and why he became a priest, what he wanted to do. The first girl that came up, her name was Zaira. Zaira told me, Sir, I was once chased an hour up a mountain by a human trafficker. Her village by the sea on the west coast of Mexico, Guerrero, was filled with these monsters. Guerrero is where the human traffickers live. Why? Because it's in the mountains, and they can easily get away over there or go to the sea. So human traffickers bathe these mountainsides. She said she got away from the trafficker, and she would go home on the mountain. There was a little house up there. There was a little village of maybe 14 or 15 lean-tos and shacks way up in the mountains. She lived with her grandfather because her parents were gone. She didn't explain what happened, but her grandfather was drunk most nights. So she has the violence of trafficking, the violence of a drunk grandfather was taking care of her. And she said, Kevin, Mr. Wells, I used to kneel in front of the statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe and pray that it would stop, but it didn't. And the next girl who came up, her name was Antonina. She's been an orphan since her father was shot dead in the street in front of her, and her mom, she said, burned to death. These stories, there are hundreds, there are thousands. Thousands are why the Sisters of Mary welcome the children each morning as mothers do sons returning from war. And as Sister Martha is translating, she's crying. And I said, Sister, but you know all this. And she said, I know, Kevin, but I often forget how bad it really is. And she said, Kevin, these are the children that Father Al wanted to save. Father Al wanted to save the humiliated, the disregarded, the rejected, and the poorest of the poor. And over 175,000 of these children have been saved by Father Al. A priest is ordained to save souls. Father Al, Venerable Aloysius Schwartz, saved generations of souls. So who was he? Father Al couldn't have been born at a worse time, one of the worst times in American history. Born in 1930 at the start of the Great Depression. His family lived on the wrong side of the tracks on the slums of D.C. Catholic family. And little Al grew up thinking, we're going to get thrown out. Like the Kaufmans, like the Monahans, like the Kennedys that are living on the alleyways, because Dad has a 6th grade education. And Dad has a real lousy job renting knockoff furniture in the neighborhoods. We're going to be on the streets, or we're going to be on the Hoovervilles on the Anacostia River. And this little boy, Aloysius, little Al, who at this point was 7 or 8 years old, Hitler's on the rise. The stock market crashed. Over 15 million people had lost their jobs in America. The dust storms kicked up. Jack Dempsey, the boxer, he's old news. The new heavyweight champion is a German boxer. When things turned dark, that's when this little boy said, this is the time where God's face seems to have turned away. This is the time where I need to know what this faith is. Where God is still here, although I cannot see him, I cannot feel him, and he seems to have turned away from our family. Something very providential happened around this time that Father Al, or little Al, was 7, 8, 9 years old. His uncle lived in Minnesota, and he had this 5 and 10, and whatever leftover comic books he had, he would send to the Schwartz family in D.C., this big 8 kids in the family, or a family of 8. He would send over the leftover comic books, Captain America, Superman, Incredible Hulk. And little Al, he didn't care about those comic books. He cared about only one comic book that his uncle would send, and it was called The Boy Commandos. Who were the Boy Commandos? They were 4 orphan boys who would travel the world to take on the bad guys. So they would go into Naziville and Hitlerville. And little Al understood by reading these comic books that that these little orphan boys, these teenagers, they understood that chaos that was left unconfronted would just ensue. And little Al understood that when something goes bad in the world, Hitler or some kind of crazy comic book type of disaster, some kind of gas, or unless it's confronted, it just broadens and goes. He said, I think that's what the saints did. When the saints lived, they understood if something got really bad, if they didn't step in, that it would just broaden, it would widen, it would ensue. He said, He said this to his brother Lou, and Lou told me this, a 90-year-old man. He was my greatest source for this book. Lou said, Kevin, little Al asked me back then, I wonder if priests can be heroes like this. Hey, Lou, what do you think? And Lou said, beats me. He said, yeah, you know what? I think I want to be a priest. I want to be a priest this way. You know, the way kids think. I want to be a hero. Well, I wanted to be a Major League Baseball player. I'm from a family of 10, and all the Wells boys played baseball. DeMatha High School, and we all had these big dreams, but I understood as time went on that my talent level, wasn't going to let that happen. Little Al wanted to be a hero, and it just couldn't be stopped. And what he did is incomprehensible. It doesn't make sense. Outside the finger of God, it can't be quantified. So it just mushroomed. And at the age of 14, he was the only kid in Washington, D.C. that got a full scholarship offer to Gonzaga High School. Gonzaga High School, to this day, is sort of one of the prestigious high schools in D.C. If you get in there, you're doing something pretty good. Al was very smart. And he went up to his father and said, hey, Dad, this is great news. Yes, Al, yeah, we're finally on the map. We're finally on the map. Yeah, Dad, I want to join seminary. Al, you're 14. I know, Dad, I'm sorry, but I gotta go. You sure? Yeah, Dad. You have my blessing. Six or 7 years go by. I was about 20, 21 years old, and he's with the Maryknollers. The Maryknollers at that point in history, it's about 1950. They're the king of missionaries. They travel the world to go to the poorest places. Japan, Central America, Africa. They were the ones. Thousands of Maryknollers spread out as a libation among the poor throughout the world. And Al, during his summer breaks of studies, would travel with the Maryknoller priests, the missionaries, for a month or two at a time before the semester course load came back. And one day Al went up to his rector and he said, hey, Father, yes, Al, how you doing? How was the summer? It was good. Hey, Father, I don't want you. Huh? Al, what are you talking? Yeah, I don't want you. What's going on, Al? What's wrong? I mean, you're doing well. You're the editor of the Maryknoller. Your grades are top of the class. Your classmates really look up to you, Al. We do have big plans. Al, you have the makings of a holy and faithful priest. You're a Maryknoller. Yeah, Father, I don't want you though, because on these summer vacations, the setting of the sun and the rising of the moon, your Maryknollers go back to their homes. And oftentimes there's televisions, and there's 3 squares, and the bedding is comfortable, and there's furniture, and oftentimes there's air conditioning. There's sweets. I don't want you, because until your Maryknollers cross the threshold and live among the poor, the poor will never trust them, because they know, in a sense, unspoken sense, that they're not really loved by these priests. because they're not living as poor men priests. So thank you, Father, but I've got to go. It was the first seminary in Maryknoll formation in the history of a religious order ever to drop out. Every single person in Aloysius' life, his dad, his brothers and sisters, his best friends from D.C., his classmates, he had religious sister aunts, his uncles, every single person said, dumbest thing you've ever done, idiot. Why would you do this? Because I found the Samists in Belgium. The Samists are formed to be poor men priests to live among the poor in poor communities for the remainder of their lives. And that's where God's leading me. Okay, dumbest thing you've ever done. What does a bold man do? Well, let me give some context really quick. Let me pull out of this story real quick. Father Aloysius Schwartz was a very bold man. He used to run in the same circles as Mother Teresa. One time, Mother Teresa and Father Al met up. I know this story because a sister was there who told it to me, one of the sisters from the order of nuns that Father Al founded. And Mother embraced Father Al, and they looked at each other, kind of the way Mother Teresa used to look at John Paul II. There was great love, great reverence. And Aloysius looked at Mother Teresa and said, "Mother, I'm going to buy you washing machines." And Mother, all 4'8", looked up at Father Al and squinted her eyes and just said, What, Father? Yes, Mother, everybody already knows your sisters are humble. They shouldn't be in their streets washing their saris. They should be out there working. Who in the world gets in Mother Teresa's grill? Only a bold man. And guess what Mother Teresa does? She smiles. And Father Al smiles because Mother Teresa says, yeah. A very bold man looks his family, his friends, I got a ship to catch. I got a boat to catch. Got to go to Belgium. On that ship, he was 3 months behind in the course load. Only French was spoken in classrooms, and guess who didn't speak French? Aloysius Schwartz. Gets off the boat. He starts learning at the University of Louvain with the Samists, the only American there. We have the Frenchmen, we have the Belgians, we have the Germans, we have the Irish, we have the English, and one American. Of course, how was he received? A cocky John Wayne black-hatted cowboy from America that is too cool for the Maryknollers. He will fail here. He's arrogant. Ain't going to work with the Samists. Within 2 years, he had passed them all by. They looked at this cocky seminarian from America and said, shame on us. This man wants to be a saint. Watch this man. Because Al did want to be a saint. You couldn't put a finger on this guy. They couldn't put a finger on this guy. And something remarkable happened, and this is when the love story begins. I contend one of the greatest stories, untold stories in the history of the Catholic Church. Father Al had heard about an apparition site in Banot, Belgium, where Our Lady, Virgin of the Poor, appeared 8 times, spoke a total of 91 words to a little peasant girl named Mariette Becco. Banot was a little podunk town. It used to remind Father Al of like Ars, like John Vanny went to a little town called Ars. It used to remind him of like what Nazareth might have been like. And Banot in 1933, when Mary came down, the town had stopped going to Mass. It was very common to the European towns back there. Industrialization was kind of crushing the soul of the Catholic family. Dads were being pulled into the cities. And Banot, after World War I, was sort of crushed by the violence of poverty and the war. So they would hear, Beno would hear the church bells on Sunday, they just didn't go. So their conscience knew, we have fallen away. So who comes down? Mary. Mary comes to Mariette. Father Al heard about this story, and he said, where is it? It's about 2.5 miles east. So Father Al would hitchhike, he would take a bus. If he was lucky enough, he'd get a ride. And continually went to Beno because he fell in love with Mary in Beno. And he studied these 8 apparitions, these 91 words. And it was a second apparition that changed his life. What happened in the second apparition? It was a winter night in 1933. Very cold in that part of Belgium in the teens. And Mary coaxed Mariette out of her house. And Mary always came in a white gown. She had a little blue sash, and she always came smiling, which is beautiful. Oftentimes in Mary's apparition, she's not smiling, but every one of these apparitions, she smiled, except for the last one. And Mary was smiling and sort of coaxed Mariette out. By the way, this is an approved apparition by the church. It's been studied extensively. It's an approved apparition. And about 60 yards outside in front of the house was a little brook, like a stream. And Mary encouraged Mariette to plunge her hands into the icy waters. You know, what a cruel thing for Our Lady to do, right? This little 14-year-old girl, plunge your hands into the water. Well, what does Mariette do? Of course, yes, Mary, of course. So she puts her hands in the water, and they just keeps them there. And when Al heard about this particular apparition, he said, yes, this is it. Mary is hearkening back to Fatima, where she tried so hard to tell humanity, unless there is a cost, unless you incorporate mortifications for poor sinners, unless you do penances for those that do not know God, unless you understand the humiliations of my Son on the cross, we're going to spin further into trouble. Please take on penances. And Aloysius, the seminarian, said, yes, there must be a cost to my priesthood. And he had just read a poem at this point. One of the most famous poets in Europe at that point was a woman named Edith Stitwell, and she wrote a poem, and she mentioned Jesus, the starved man on the cross. Jesus, the starved man on the cross. That poem became an icon, an indelible icon in his heart. And Al said, yes, Jesus, if I am going to become a priest, I must become the starved man on the cross. I want everything. I want to be nailed to the cross with you. Stick me on the other side. Don't let them see me. Let them see you. But I want it all. I want the violence of the pain. I want the indignity of being naked in front of your mom. I want all my friends abandoning me. I want to know the violence of being a true follower of God. Make me the starved man on the cross. Very key words there. Very key words. And it would come back. On the day he was ordained in 1957, he raised his hand and he asked his rector, he was a 27-year-old man, he raised his hand and he said, hey, what's the worst place? And the rector said, what do you mean? And yeah, what's the worst place? So, well, the Korean War just ended. It's pretty bad down there. Over 1 million had died. And well, Father Al said, do they need Catholic priests down there? Yeah, I think they do. Well, can I go to Korea? Yeah, we'll try and arrange that. So on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, 1957, Father Al, the first day, got off a train. This is the southern peninsula of Korea in Busan. Busan was very mountainous. He got out and he walked the entire circumference of this town. Very cold out there, very, very cold. And he saw communities shivering in these shacks, these shack towns on the outside of the city. He saw orphans kind of left over war shrapnel, leftover landmines, just left to sort of parents who died in the war and people weren't tending to them, saw women living under bridges who were impregnated by American servicemen, European servicemen, outcasts to society. And get this, there was lepers in the streets rubbing their limbs off people, diseased limbs off people to steal their money. So he was looking into a dystopian novel. He was looking into something that Satan said, okay, the war killed 1 million. Well, now let's kill souls now. So these are the survivors. Well, let's kill them. Impregnated women under bridges, lepers, go ahead. You're my demons. Kill them. Steal their money. Orphans die. Up in the mountains on the southern peninsula overlooking the ocean, were thousands of the TB patients, not patients, because there was no doctors that would go up there. That's where the TB lived. TB was huge back then. So they would live in these little nothings, shacks, tents, thousands of them. You'd walk by these mountains and you would hear a cacophony of coughs. And nobody went up those mountains because if you went up those mountains, you would catch TB and you could die. So they were left to fend for themselves and just die alone. And Aloysius, who sees all this after his 3-4 hour walk throughout Busan, he says, Mary, smelled in the rot and the dead animals and the human waste and the pollution and the sickness. He said, Mary, this is the incense of my new home. Poverty, I ask for it and it embraces me. The sweet violence of poverty embraces me. Mary, thank you. Thank you for bringing me to the rest of my life. Thank you for rolling out the red carpet of poverty. Now I can kind of know or begin to know what it was like to be Jesus, the poor man of Nazareth who had nowhere to lay his head. Now, thankfully, again, he doesn't speak the language once again, right? Of course, he doesn't know Korean. So thankfully, there was a college nearby, and there was a student named Damiano Park, and Damiano was studying English, spoke English pretty well. And right away, Father Al's brought in touch with this man. And Father Al said, I understand you speak English. Yes, Father. Yes, Father. Yeah, well, I need your help. I'm kind of behind here. I don't speak the language, and I'm brand new in town, and I'm a priest. And by the way, Damiano was a Buddhist. A year later, he'd be a Catholic. But he was a Buddhist at that point. And Aloysius said, can you help me? Oh, yes, Father. Yes, Father. Yes, I hear you're a holy man, Father. Yes. Okay, great, Damiano, that's great. Are you sure you can help me now? Because we got work to do. I'm behind. Yes, Father, yes, Father, yes, Father. Okay, Damiano, let's get going. Let's go up the mountains. No, Father, no, Father, no, Father. Hey, Damiano, the first thing I asked you, you're saying no? Are you quitting on me with the first thing I asked you? Father, you can't go up those mountains because you might get very sick. And Father, I don't know if you know, but it's a very serious disease and many people die from it now. And yes, Damiano, but that's why I go. Let's not think about COVID 2020, okay? Let's not think about that. Yes, Damiano, that's why I go. That's why we go. Yes, Father. So Damiano and Father Al used to climb these mountains where Father Al used to get onto his knees into these tents, and there'd be 7 men crammed up, taking up every square inch of the dirt, lying down, and of course it smelled like the 7th ring of hell. And Father Al would get down and look the man in the eye, one of the men in the eye, and say, look into my eyes. I carry Jesus Christ within me, and Damiano's translating. Look into my eyes, I'm behind, but I will take you down because Jesus Christ does not want you here. Jesus Christ wants you living a life of abundance. So give me time, look into my eyes. I carry Jesus Christ in me and I will take you down. Within 15 years, all of South Korea is changed. This one American priest was building 7-story high hospitals and employing the doctors and nurses and paying for them. All patients go free. Building elementary schools in the slums, tuberculariums, leprosariums, hospices, and really what he's known for today, 7-story high boys' towns and girls' towns. All of South Korea is changing. They're becoming Catholic. He's sacramentalizing all of South Korea. He had formed an order of sisters called the Sisters of who? Mary. The Sisters of Mary, to mother this tortured country back to health. So how does this happen? How does this happen? How does one American priest do this in 15 years? When he first arrived in Korea as a 27-year-old priest, he said, "Mary, I've given you my life. You carry the whip hand. I am your slave. Whip me to where you want me to go. Louis de Montfort, I am your slave now. Where do you want me to go?" And Mary points, "You go there." What? You go there. It was a condemned shack at the base of a mountain that was mistaken. Maybe you can see it behind me. The shack that was mistaken for an outhouse. There was no electricity. There was no running water, no heat, nothing. It smelled terrible. Smelled terrible. There was rice and there was rats, mice and rats. He was made fun of for living there by his fellow priests. He was seen as a lunatic. Oh, the John Wayne lunatic, living in a shack. Mary there? Yes, Al. Yes, Mother. Why did he go there? Why did he go there? Well, he went there because of the second apparition. It's time for me to die to myself. It's time to amputate every measure, every last remnant of my American comfort. Anything that I took with me from America to this country, it must die now. I must amputate everything if I'm going to serve this dystopian novel outside the doors. So what happens when you absorb the way of the saints, St. Anthony of the Desert, St. Francis of Assisi? What happens when you read the lives of the saints and read Scripture every day and give up your life to Mary and fasting and penitence and mortification for 5 years? What happens? Well, the walls begin to act like a wine press where they squeeze you into a libation that would be poured out onto the streets of Busan, South Korea, that would wash over the poor and the rejected and the humiliated, where his Sisters of Mary would join in and bring the broken ones new life. In the 1970s, there was over 12,000 children in these boys' towns and girls' towns. He was taking over hospitals that were 2 to a bed with 2 or 3 patients on the ground, taking them over. "Oh, this hospital's not working. How about you give it to me? How about I buy it from you?" Remember Schindler's List? Remember what Schindler did? He ransomed the Jews. He bought the Jews. Let me save the Jews. Gave him some silly job making ammunition. He made it all wrong. Father Al was buying souls. "Oh, the hospital people are dying there. Can I take it over? Can I buy?" No. Well, how's $2 million? "Father, it's yours." He would take over the hospital, and guess what he did? Okay, the new nurses here, they're the Sisters of Mary. And I want the exposed Blessed Sacrament in a chapel. And I want you to wheel the patients in. And guess what happened? They stopped dying. These agnostics, these Buddhists, they were all becoming Catholic. This was not a stinking social justice priesthood. This was a priesthood of saying, "I will lead you to the Catholic faith because that will take you to heaven." Father Al was sacramentalizing Korea, then he was taking the soul and he did it in soul. But what happens when you want to be a priest who's not known? Well, you can't keep the cat. The cat can't stay in the bag. The cat's out of the bag. So the cardinal from the Philippines said, "You got to come to our country now. Korea is changing. They're not poor anymore, but we're poorer than Korea. Will you come to the Philippines?" So he ends up in the Philippines in the late 70s and 80s. Within 10 years, There's 11,000 children in boys' towns and girls' towns in the Philippines. He's buying hospitals in the Philippines and sacramentalizing it where people stop dying. This is not a fairy tale story. This is a true story. Remember little Al, little 8-year-old Al? Hey, Lou, do you think I can be like a boy commando priest? I don't know, Al. I don't know. I think I'm going to try and be a hero priest. He makes Iron Man look like a piker, like a little thing in a pink ballerina skirt. Changed all of the Philippines. He's 58 years old. Had the largest nonprofit in the world at that point. Tens of millions of dollars are coming to Father Al. Never kept a nickel in his pocket his entire priesthood. Didn't want to be tempted. Because he had that kind of money, he was attacked everywhere he went. American bishops wrote the Pope twice. Tell this priest in Korea to stop working our side of the ocean and taking our money. Twice Father Al received cease and desist orders from Pope Paul VI. What does a man who gets in Mother Teresa's grill do? He takes a plane to the Vatican. And the Pope sets him up with his number 2 at the time. And Father Al explains his work. And the Pope's number 2 says, "Thank you for ignoring the Pope's letters. Carry on and save the poor. And I will take care of the American bishops. Do not worry about them any longer." His own bishop was getting into the money in Korea and tried to get him thrown out of the country. He called for an apostolic visitation. This American priest, he's a renegade, he's a revolutionary, he lives in shacks, he lives with the poor, he's building hospitals, he should just be a priest. Come. So they set an apostolic visitation, right? The same thing that Bishop Strickland got last year, right? So there was interviews. 6 months later, there was a removal. The bishop was removed. How dare you? How dare you? A mafia kingpin who ruled all of South Korea. This book, I'm begging you to read this book because it speaks to where we need to be in 24. A mafia kingpin who ruled all of South Korea. He was a monster. He murdered. He killed. His story is remarkable. He was in the politicians' pockets. The clergy was afraid of him. Politicians were afraid of him. The police were afraid of him. He owned South Korea, and he wanted Father Al. Why? Because Father Al had the money. Twice he beat up Father Al. But what does a man do who's protected by the mantle of Mary? He says, "Keep coming because you cannot touch me." And the mafia kingpin falls away. And I'm not going to tell you this story, but it's amazing what happened. It's only through the hand of God. All over, he was attacked. He was mocked. He was stigmatized. But he had given his life over to Mary. "Mary, send me out. Drive me. You carry the whip hand. Send me to the worst places. Send me to the most disregarded." Finally, everybody's out of his way. The kingpin, the bishop, the American bishops, the priests that mocked him, they're all out of his way. Finally, Al can get started. He is already saving thousands and thousands and thousands of the poorest of the poor. But he's like, more, Mary, more. Help me keep building. Help me keep converting folks. Help me, Mary, help me. But no, what happens in 1989? He's diagnosed with ALS. Al ran every day of his life. He was an athlete. Back in high school and seminary, he was a football player, baseball player, basketball player, and he ran. He began to feel like his legs weren't working the way they used to. He was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease. Lou Gehrig's disease, guys, gentlemen, I think you probably know, it's usually a life expectancy of 3 years. But he was too afraid to tell the Sisters of Mary. The Sisters of Mary, at this point, there was over 400 of them. He didn't want to tell them because he didn't know how to tell them. They were the ones raising up these Lazaruses all over 2 continents, 8 boys' towns and girls' towns. How do I tell the sisters and the children that I'm dying? But the kids got it. They would see him running around the track at night, and he had a little wobble in his leg, and he had lost weight. And he knows he probably has 2.5, 3 years to live. So who does he do? What does he do? He goes to Mary. Mary, what now? What now? And Mary, in his interior, in his prayer, says, Al, I'm losing my Juan Diegos. Al, I need you to come back. Come back to the Western Hemisphere. I know you've been there for a while, but I need you in Mexico because poverty is crushing the Mexican poor, and I'm losing my Catholics. They're becoming evangelical and agnostic, and they're leaving the faith altogether. I'm losing them, Al. Will you come to Mexico? Will you build back the church in Mexico? Well, Mary, I use a cane now, and my voice doesn't work like it used to, and my clothes, they don't really fit anymore, and there's not as much left in the tank. But Mary, if you call, of course, then Mary, I go. Mary, I go. So Al hopped on a plane with 2 sisters of Mary, where he staked his claim like a frontiersman with no support of, he doesn't know how he's going to be received by the Mexican bishops or priests. He doesn't have any land. He doesn't know what building contractors are like down there, permitting and all that. But Mary said, hey, go. And he knew, obviously, this is where he was going to disappear. In a sense, this was going to be his unfinished symphony. His body would disappear in the land of Mexico. And in 1991, he began to build. Remember what he asked for in seminary with that poem by Edith Stitwell, The Starved Man on the Cross. He said, Jesus, nail me to the other side. I want everything that you had from that cross. I want everything. The poor guy, Father Al, the poor guy got his answer. He was nailed to the cross of his wheelchair. He couldn't move anything. He would go to the bathroom and the sisters had to clean him. Jesus was naked in front of his mother on the cross. He had no dignity. Al was an athlete and he had severe arthritis in his legs, coupled with ALS. He experienced the violence of pain pretty much every waking hour. Jesus, thank you. Thank you. I asked for it, and Jesus, you give it to me. Al understood that ALS patients often die by suffocation when the last thing to go are the throat muscles. Jesus, thank you, because I've learned in study that maybe that's how you died on the cross, when your lungs collapsed in on themselves and you suffocated. Jesus, thank you. Jesus, you answered my prayer of 40 years ago. You've given me it all. Jesus, I don't ask for a lot. I don't ask for a lot. But I've been kind of fortunate in that your mother told me what to do. And right now, Jesus, right now, there's thousands of children spread throughout the world that are being taken care of by these sisters. And Jesus, how about we make a deal? I'll ask you for one thing. I take all that I am right now, which amounts to the way the world would see it as nothing, because I'm rendered helpless. I can't do anything. I can't speak anymore. I can't move. I've got nothing. How about I give you all of this if Jesus, you take this baton when I die and give it to a sister and keep this train rolling. Mary, how about this? How about I offer you all of this, that you would make that one thing happen? And it was then, in that bedroom that I've been in, I've spent the night in the bed, it was on that bed that this man who had saved tens of thousands of bodies and souls said, Right now, I am doing my most powerful work, rendered completely helpless. Why? Because what did Al say as a 7-year-old boy when God's face seemed to turn away in the slums? I must know what faith is. I've got nothing. So he's a 7-year-old boy in that bed, and he has nothing except a prayer. Jesus, take this and keep the train going northbound. On March 16th, 1992, Father Al died, and of course, Jesus said, well done. Sister Michaela, pick up that baton. Brazil, Guatemala, Honduras. In 2 weeks, I'll be in Tanzania, Africa, boys' towns and girls' towns. Today, as we speak, there are 20,000 children. This morning, 20,000 children that were eating a bowl of cornflakes. Right now, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Tonight, dinner, chicken and rice. All over the world, 20,000 children because of one man. I haven't gotten to the greatest part of the story. You can forget everything I just said and listen to this. Every year in July, between 3,500 and 4,500 children graduate from these boys' towns and girls' towns. These Lazaruses that came in, having been pimped out, having been abused demonically, beaten, seen things that nobody should see, and they're brought in as deadened souls. And 5 years later, as the sisters pluck in, get into the wound and toss it out, as 18-year-olds, fully catechized, fully loved, fully rebuilt, daily holy hours, daily masses, 7 o'clock rosaries, sports, education, music. When they graduate as 18 years old, this is what happens, and this is the story. 3,500 to 4,500 for years now pour out into universities, workplaces, and even rural villages all over the world. Just take universities for a minute. First day of school, they set up their little Father Al prayer card in the corner, and there's a little rosary, and maybe they got a little statue of Our Lady, Virgin of the Poor, because they've learned the story of Father Al. They all know it. It's in a little corner, and their roommate comes in, and the roommate maybe will have 3 different color hair, and maybe will have earrings in all the wrong places, and maybe some tattoos. Nothing against tattoos at all, but you know, they've embraced the world. And they see their new roommate, and they see the little, whatever the heck the Catholic hocus pocus corner is over there. And yeah, that's hocus pocus grandmother stuff. Yeah, my grandmother, I think, did that. Is that a rosary or a bracelet? Who is that? Is that? Oh yeah, I guess that's what Mary. Yeah, and they get judged throughout the world. Workplaces, same thing. What happens all over the world 3, 4, 5, 6 months later is from the roommate or a work member or someone back in the old town, old village. Hey, can we talk? Yeah. What's going on? Yeah. I'm sorry. I talked behind your back and I mocked you, and I thought you were a big fat Catholic loser, and I couldn't stand you because I thought I really got a big loser for a roommate, and I was angry. But I've been watching you, and I see that you're making friends, and I'm really not. I'm making the wrong kind of friends. And I see your eyes, and I see the light in them. And I look at myself, and I see eyes that are kind of dull. And I see this joy that you have, and I don't know what it is. And I know in the corner, I've been seeing you obliging that corner every day, and I'm finally realizing that it seems like it's prayer that's enabling you this, would you teach me how to pray? Of course I will. Let's go for a walk. Let's go for a walk. The greatest part of this story of Father Al Schwartz is this. I've come to believe, I'm arrogant enough to say, sorry God, I'm arrogant enough to say that I've come to believe the greatest Catholic missionaries in the world today are these teenagers that pour out like a libation onto deadened landscape throughout the world that have dismissed God. And because they've been raised from the dead, brought back to life by these Sisters of Mary and Father Al's intercession from heaven, they are bringing the lost into the Catholic Church. My little plea that I'll make, Father Al is dead, the sisters are too busy. My little plea that I'll make, if it's in your heart, if you believe my words, and I'm not here to tell you to believe me or not, but I am a journalist and I try to keep things straight on the straight and narrow. If you believe it, consider maybe for your Lenten tithe giving to these Sisters of Mary. I do not know anything better in the Catholic Church today. I do not know anything better. I'm sure there's some just as good, if not better. I'm sure they're out there. I do not know anything better in the worldwide Catholic Church today. Why? Because they're taking the lost and bringing them back into the faith. Why? Because they are fearless. Who was fearless? Venerable Aloysius Schwartz. Who was bold? Venerable Aloysius Schwartz. Who's holy, fearless, and bold today? These 20,000 children pouring out into the world, and I believe in a certain way, saving a Roman Catholic Church. So if you do have any interest, you can write down worldvillages.org, worldvillages.org. You can learn about the Sisters of Mary and these children. Everything in my life changed 3.5 years ago when I went to Girls Town and I knew nothing about them. And once, a month later, when I flew back home into the teeth of COVID, my whole life changed, and so did my tithe. Everything got flipped on its head. Number one, Sisters of Mary. So maybe for the Lenten tithe, consider the Sisters of Mary in your heart, because one of the best things going. Thank you very much, guys.